Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
And welcome back to another episode of the Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael, the Money Byrd.
Thank you, Brad. As a business and healthcare law firm, we meet a lot of interesting people and hear their amazing stories. In today's episode, we're going to talk with our good friend, Dave Mandell.
Now, Michael, before we introduce Dave, generally in an episode, we might use a word that the audience does not know. And I wanted to ask you, do you know what the term contortion means?
Yes, that's not a legal word. I just so happen to know that the definition of contortion is that it basically means to twist or bend into a condition or form. Now, I may have known you were going to ask that and looked it up, but but when I did look it up, what I found is that that's where the expression bending over backwards comes from.
Oh, man. Now I feel like you're taunting me. You want me to say a dad joke now, don't you? It's going to happen one episode, but I'm not going to do it this time.
Well, at ByrdAdatto, we refer to this as a Brad joke.
All right, fair enough.
But what does this have to do with today's episode?
All right, well, once the audience gets to meet our guests, they'll quickly realize why the word contortion pops in my head when I knew that Dave would be joining us, because his personal and professional life revolves around the skill of bending and twisting from one state to the next, making sure his client's protection is anything but uniform.
So the formal introduction, the bio of our friend Dave Mandell. Now, we're really stepping up our game in Season 2. This is our second Harvard grad we've gotten in Season 2. Dave graduated from Harvard cum laude in history. He went to UCLA School of Law and the Anderson School of Business at UCLA for his MBA. Dave professionally is a partner with the OJM Group. It's a wealth management group with a heavy focus on working with doctors and other healthcare providers. And we all have a common connection with Dave because of our ByrdAdatto and OJM's focus on education and training. Dave has authored and is a renowned authority in the field of asset protection and general wealth management. He has 40 national publications, has been interviewed as an expert in national media outlets, including Bloomberg and Fox TV. He's presented lectures, webcasts, and podcasts on asset protection, tax planning, and wealth management for numerous regional and national organizations. And maybe most importantly, Dave hosts the OJM Group's podcast. And we're going to be a guest on that, maybe even perhaps before this one airs. You can just search on any of the major platforms, the OJM Group, and find their podcast. And finally, Brad, back to your original word, contortion. As a fun fact, Dave's wife is a contortionist. Welcome, Dave.
I didn't know if you were going to come all the way back to that. I was going to throw that out, but that's really good. I'm really happy to be here, and that was pretty fun. I like that.
Well, Dave,
we're
we're pumped to have you here, and our theme this season for the Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto is thinking outside the box. And you have this really cool story, but before we dive too deep into your story, like some of our guests, you have a confession that you want to share today, don't you? I know you. Dave, you're an attorney.
That's right, I am. 25 years. So take that as you may.
This is a judgment-free zone.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're just
right, exactly.
Well, tell us about the first few years when you started practicing law.
Yeah. So, one of the things, I come from a physician family. So, we have some sort of lawyers out there in the family, but most of the Mandell clan are in medicine. So when I started my practice, I actually, even when I was in law school, I spent a summer working for an attorney who also was a professor up at Northeastern in Boston, near where I'm from. And he had written some books and was practicing in the area of asset protection. And that really interested me because it was an area that I hadn't really heard about in law school. It was something, the reason I met him is because my father wanted to put some of that planning in himself as a radiologist. And so when I came out of law school and business school, I started working in the estate planning area, but really trying to add asset protection. And I wrote a book in 1997, about a year into practice, called The Doctor's Asset Protection Guide, which was the first book on that area for physicians, really modeled around that mentor that I had in the summer job during school and just kind of tweaking it for physicians. So that kind of took my career off. And so I was originally practicing in Southern California, and then I moved to New York, Manhattan, and affiliated with a small firm there, and was doing, just estate planning and asset protection. And based on that book, started speaking at different conferences and was building a national practice. Had doctors from and business owners and other clients, but mostly physicians in all over the country. So even though I was in, 100 Park Avenue and 575 Lexington, my clients were all over the country.
It's very cool.
I have to say, I'm pretty impressed. In 1997, writing your first book, I had been practicing law for 2 years at that point. And if I wrote a book about everything I knew, it would be a couple pages.
Well, that makes an assumption I knew everything that was in the book. I mean, I was just writing basically with a little bit of my mentor's help and kind of tweaking it. So, it was funny though, people would get the book and then say, hey, on page 182, you said this. And I would have to be like, yeah, let me think about that, write some notes down, make sure I have all of it together. That was 23 years ago now. I know it all. So.
That's really cool. So now you, again, like some of our guests, have had some twists and turns in your career.
Sure.
Talk to us about going to get your MBA and kind of how that fit into the picture, and then kind of from there, how you ended up at the OJM Group.
Right. Yeah. So the MBA part is, I guess I'm not so proud about it. I really was in law school for 2 years, and one of my buddies said, hey, we should probably, we have a great MBA program, Anderson at UCLA. We like being students. We want to live by the beach. Let's apply over to the business school. And I was lucky enough to get in because you actually had to apply. And of course, my friend did not do that. He did not go through it. He finished the 3 years, wanted to go get married. Turns out he became a lawyer and then a CEO of a company. So he's not practicing law anymore. Now he's a private equity person. But so the MBA part was really more just wanting to be a student at UCLA for a little while longer. And if anybody visits UCLA campus, they'll know why, right? So, yeah, I mean, I was glad I got that education. And frankly, I was really interested in business and finance and things like that, right? Making a joke, but I was interested in that area. So now I got on practice and what I was doing, right, for the first 10 years was helping clients with their asset protection and estate planning. And as you guys know, that's very transactional. So you work with a client, you do a great job, they love you. And I might not talk to them more than once a year and sometimes never again, right? Mm-hmm. I did their work, they liked it, but 5 years later they moved. So they're not, they got a new attorney if they updated their documents. That was kind of frustrating for me. So, I had this interest in finance and also having longer term relationships. And then even in asset protection, I think this is really important. You want to talk about outside the box. Most people think of asset protection as being something you go to a lawyer to. And lawyers certainly play a key role, but legal tools are only one of a kind of a three-legged stool of asset protection. There's insurance, there's exempt assets, and then there's legal tools. And you can imagine, I'm going to use some medical analogies, right? Because we have a lot of doctor clients. It's like in asset protection, if you can't talk about insurance, basic coverage like homeowners or umbrella policies or the malpractice, then really it's like going to a dermatologist and not being able to talk about sunblock. I mean, these are absolutely core pieces of what you need to have in your asset protection plan. But as good as I was, and as much as I liked the law firm in New York, we didn't deal with that. We didn't have someone who could review their insurances. Same thing with exempt assets. You guys are in Texas. Most people know Texas has an unlimited homestead exemption, at least from a value point of view. There's some geographic limitations. That's asset protection. So is qualified plans and IRAs. But typically, lawyers don't talk about those things because it's not something they can provide. They're not implementing IRAs or qualified plans or some of these things. So for two reasons. One, I wanted to have a longer term relationship with clients and I wanted to be more comprehensive, not only just in asset protection, but when clients would come to me, probably like they do to you, they would bring up questions about tax. They would bring up questions about estate. They would bring up questions about financial planning and insurances. And again, I was really just in one lane in the law firm. And so my idea was if we could build, kind of a multi-specialty practice that had different elements into it, like a multi-specialty medical group, not just one specialty, that would be really great. And we could provide clients and really build a long-term relationship. So that's how I kind of transitioned and why I wanted to transition from, and I kept my law practice, of course, but why I wanted to build OJM Group.
So is that all of a sudden, after hanging out at UCLA for that extra 2 years, did you feel like that MBA, that dual degree, is going to be able to help you with your clientele with their asset protection planning?
Well, you definitely, and I think even more than, frankly, with the asset protection planning, I think it's more helping us build our business at OJM and being able to think through how we can provide better service to clients. And expand. And, we're in 3 places. We have a Phoenix office. Our main office is in Ohio, and I'm here in South Florida, and our clients are everywhere. So a lot of what I've learned there and continue to try to learn from guys like, folks like you folks who have clients around the country is how to build a organization that can provide that kind of high level of service. Some of my lessons I learned from there still apply every day today.
This is something you may have heard us say before, but it goes back to where we've learned that we're now entrepreneurs trapped in lawyers' bodies. So I think in your case, it's very similar to, as you were explaining, running the OJM Group.
Yep, absolutely.
So talk to us about some of the most creative, or using our theme, outside the box ideas that you've used for asset protection planning with your clients.
Sure. So I've got a couple ideas. Okay. One is, and again, for the physicians listening to this, I think they really connected this, just the idea that it's diagnostics and then treatment. In the asset protection, I see way too many physicians and other clients gravitating, and they say, hey, I want a trust, or I read about a limited partnership, or I want a domestic asset protection trust, or something else. And there are service providers out there, and you and I know who they are. We're willing to sell you a package of tools, sort of cookie cutter, or will really market a particular tool as the answer and sell that. Whereas when they come to OJM, and this is the multidisciplinary part, we get engaged to do is a diagnostic where they're getting work product from us, which looks at, and it's really me doing it, all of their assets, either at a practice or personally or both, whatever they come to us and they want us to look at, and laying out all the options. How are they exposed today? What are their options from an insurance point of view, from an exempt asset point of view, from a legal point of view, what the price points should be, I think are reasonable for that, and kind of lay that all out in a diagnostic. And then they can decide if they want to work with OJM Group on implementation or my law practice on implementation or not. But it allows them to be educated about what their options are. And I find clients really like that. They pay a flat fee, they know what they're going to get in terms of education and what their game plan is. And then they can decide as an educated consumer what I want to implement. And a lot of times it's, hey, I've laid out and recommended A through D. They just want to start with A and B and then maybe eventually graduate to C and D later. So that's first. I think that is, it seems very intuitive and it should be kind of, I think, the process everywhere, but it's not. So that's a little bit outside the box. That's one idea. And I've got a couple others. In terms of kind of implementation, here's one simple debt shield approach. And especially, we'll talk about this, in a second, but obviously with rates low today, let's say you have a client who has a primary home in Dallas and they have a secondary home, and both of them are kind of paid down, but they want to asset protect both of them as much as they can. Well, we know if their primary home qualifies for the homestead exemption, why wouldn't we look at potentially leveraging up that second home, maybe refinancing. They might even be able to lower their interest costs today, or get a home equity line or a second mortgage, and use that to pay down the primary home, right? So at the end of the day, their total debt is the same, but now they've got more equity in the home that's protected under homestead, and more debt, less equity in the home that's not. Now, we might layer on an LLC if that's possible, et cetera. But just by doing that, they may actually lower their total costs. And they haven't had to spend a lot of money on legal tools or advanced techniques, but they've actually, killed two birds with one stone kind of idea. Right?
I love that reference to Debt Shield too. I know, we've had clients in their practices take out a line of credit or something just to create that layer. That's a cool idea.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so the lay term is debt shield. The fancy lawyer term would be collateralization, right? So, but it's the same thing. One other idea, let me throw out there for your listeners, is the idea of a non-qualified plan. Okay. Now, if I asked how many listeners out there would raise their hand to this, we can't see it. How many people think that tax rates are going to go up on high income people? Right? We're at the highest debt to GDP ratio since World War II. We may have more stimulus and we need it. Okay, this is a tough time. But the bottom line is, even if nothing gets done, income tax rates are going to go up because they're going to sunset the lower rates. And there's a lot of, I think, thought that the rates will go higher than that over time. Well, non-qualified plans are ideally suited to that, yet fewer than 5% medical practices or privately held businesses have non-qualified plans, even though most Fortune 1000s do. So a lot of times I'm telling, listen, you're a small business, you're a medical practice, let's try to take advantage of what the big boys do. I personally have a non-qualified plan. The reason a lot of doctors or business owners don't hear about it is you don't get a deduction up front. But what you do get is tax-free growth and tax-free access, like an unlimited Roth. And in many states, like Texas, like Florida, it's also totally asset protected, +5, at the top of the scale. It's an exempt asset. It funds into an exempt asset. So again, in my view, in my world, it's not out of the box, but in the general world, it is, because very few people have heard about it or are putting it in place. And there's a lot of people who would use it if they knew about it. And the other nice thing about non-qualified plans is you don't have to offer it to all your employees. You could do it just for the owner or two. And oftentimes that's a really key thing, because you can get into high costs, with a regular qualified plan like a 401k if you're offering it to everybody.
And does that work kind of in conjunction with a qualified plan, or is it an either or type proposition?
Absolutely an and. Okay, there's no impact at all. So you can have any type of qualified plan, 401k, profit sharing plan, SEP IRA, any of that, and still do a non-qualified plan on top of it, because it's not deductible. That takes it out of any competition whatsoever.
That's great. I love that. I mean, some serious out of the box thinking there. And now, besides obviously the podcast, we already kind of started talking about as something new that you guys are working on. What else are you guys working on at OJM Group?
Well, obviously, we manage, close to $500 million. So this year has been challenging. And I'm proud to say that we've done well by our clients and kept most of our clients, doing what they should with the markets, right? I mean, in March, we didn't know how far things were going to go down. The idea that we're positive in most of the indices right now, even though what's going on in the world is surprising to everybody. And anyone who tells you they predicted what was going to happen, walk away, because nobody predicted this year in any type of fashion. So a lot of our work's been just sort of helping clients navigate that and tie into their long-term plans, because investing is only, in our view, it's only a tool to get our clients where they want to go, right? So that's a big thing. The other thing I mentioned a little bit already, but with the historically low interest rates, there's some really interesting planning opportunities for people. It could be sort of the debt shield. I mean, anything from as basic as just refinancing your mortgage. And it's probably something that, that's pretty top of mind, and a lot of people have done it. To using those low rates. We have some clients taking portfolio loans at less than 2% and doing some interesting things with it, as long as it makes sense and it's done conservatively. financing some of these non-qualified plans at long-term, kind of fixed rates. There's a lot of wealth opportunities out there because rates are so low, and it all depends on the client and what their circumstances are, but that's something we're working on.
It's very cool.
Awesome. Well, Dave, we're so grateful to have you on Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. We're going to say goodbye now. We'll go into a commercial, and then on the other side, Brad and I will share kind of any legal insights we have from today's episode.
Great to be here. Thanks, guys. Always fun.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
And welcome back to the Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, still here with my co-host, Michael Byrd. Now, Michael, I love hearing Dave's story, and he proves that, again, you don't have to be uniform on how you approach your business or your personal planning. Most likely for him also, it's not how you have to actually even plan his professional career. Obviously, he pivoted. But what are some other takeaways that you have, Michael?
Well, first, I love talking to Dave, and we work with Dave professionally, and so that's we first met him speaking at conferences, and then have worked collaboratively with clients, and so it's great. We referencing his three-legged stool, ByrdAdatto is only one leg. We help advise and design the legal documentation for an asset protection strategy, but we don't deal with the other two. And Dave has been gracious enough to bring us in for that as well for a lot of his clients. And so, I really enjoyed the conversation. It reminds me kind of, me like in context, kind of stepping back from a legal perspective, like, when do you need asset protection, and how do you know even where to start and when to start? And I always talk about this kind of spectrum of protection to think about, pinpointing where you are and pinpointing, kind of what level of protection you may want to ultimately have. Again, mostly focused on the legal side for the spectrum. And so if you think about the spectrum from the standpoint of, you do nothing. You just have your practice, which is, I guess, doing something. You have a professional entity, but you don't otherwise have, an asset protection strategy. We'll call that a 0 on a scale of, 0 to 10. And we'll call 10 the most protected you can be, and think of like an offshore trust with a lot of bells and whistles to it as the most protective you can get. So one thing to think about is if you're a 0, it doesn't mean you have 0 protection. Again, Brad will talk a little bit in a minute, I hope, about the other legs and layers. But even from a legal perspective, each state gives you some level of protection of assets that you own. And so one that many people can understand and probably intuitively know is that you have a homestead exemption. So your house in most states is protected as your residence.
Right. And even Dave mentioned that as in Texas, how it has one of the best.
Yeah. Well, and in Texas, you can have your cattle.
Yes. And a donkey.
Yes. So
2 dogs.
Texas is pretty old school. And if you happen to have some livestock, check into it. So that's your 0, right? And then if you want to progress on the scale, kind of the way to think about moving towards more protection from where you are is you're going to give up control over your assets for each step you move towards 10. So if you're a 10, you don't own the assets, you have no say over the assets, it's out of the country assets, and so, it's literally no control. And so where you'll see kind of the movement from a 0 to, like, say, a 4, you'll hear of family limited partnerships. And a family limited partnership, even when we're building them, can be anywhere from a 4 to a 6 or even a 7 on the scale. And it all ties to how much control do we put in place for the doctors or business people that are creating this FOP. And so, if you want to be create an FOP and put your passive assets into it, and you want to still on a rainy day be able to access those, that's doable, and you're going to be more at the 4 level. Or you may decide to have others come in and make decisions for the assets and move on the scale. But then once you get to the 6 or 7 level, you're starting to talk about trusts, which are separate entities, and depending on what type of trust you have, again, the control being the main factor, you're going to kind of move on down the scale. And so Brad always at our speeches talks about how some people are afraid to step out of the shower, and some people are willing to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. And so, there is kind of a conversation that has to happen to find the sweet spot of, what the right legal structure would be for an asset protection plan.
Yeah, that goes back to in anything in life is risk tolerance that you're describing. And so I think what I love about what Dave said and what you said is, everyone needs to figure out what is going to be their first line of defense that they're comfortable with when it comes to asset protection planning. And as we've talked about already, is most states have something in place. Now, they're all going to be different. So we're not even going to spend any time breaking down every single state, but some states have more protection, some have less. And then as Dave mentioned, then if after next level is, all right, these things protect me, what type of insurance can I get? So homeowners, car insurance, umbrella, professionals get malpractice insurance. And then he even alluded to that you can use more than just insurance itself. Maybe you could look into how your mortgages are protected or other thing. Anything that is basically an additional piece of paper that is now ensuring certain protections. And then finally, the last piece, and as Dave was saying, there's some organizations out there that they jump to this being their first piece, which is what type of incorporation, what things can I incorporate to protect those assets? So a lot of professionals form their own professional entity, or as a person that has multiple homes, they might form a family limited partnership or put each home in a separate LLC. All these are choices that you have to make when you're sitting there deciding what's your risk tolerance, what are the assets that you have out there. Some of them be high risk assets, some be low risk assets. So if you own a construction company, and you have employees constantly out, you don't want to own that in your own name. You're probably going to have a lot of insurance because unfortunately people get injured on those jobs. Or if you have just one home and that's it, and you have just a few $1,000s in a bank account, you're probably wondering why we're still talking about this. But everyone's going to have different layers of financials, different assets. And so what I loved about what Dave said is that you need to individualize it. Unfortunately, not one size does fit all. And that's why it's really important to partner with someone like Dave's group, because that due diligence that he does in the beginning really sets the tone for what are you comfortable with, going back to what you said about stepping out of the shower, stepping out of a perfectly built airplane.
Yeah, and really looking at, I mentioned or alluded to this as a non-risky asset versus a risky asset. We've had doctors, they have their practice and they want to get everything separated from the practice and the, malpractice liability. But if you form an FLP and put an airplane in with your Schwab account, you've still got some issues, because if that plane goes down, your Schwab account is exposed. And so again, there's no cookie cutter answer here. You actually got to kind of dig into it and be strategic.
Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe, make sure to give us a 5-star rating, and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.